I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness. John Morant with elevation.
Welcome to episode 20. In today's episode, we're going to kind of look at some hypotheticals, what will happen with the NBA playoffs, kind of look at the bubble teams that would be in or would be out. Because personally, we think that the NBA might go with just 16 best teams in the league regardless of conference. So we're going to look at those teams that would be on the bubble and which teams would make it into the playoffs. So you want to list off the top 16 teams in the league right now?
Yeah, so if the NBA ended up going with that format, so like Sam said, 16 teams would end up making the playoffs like they always do, but the seeding would be as followed. The number 1 seed would be the Bucks, number 2 seed Lakers, 3 seed Raptors, 4 seed Clippers, 5 seed Celtics, 6 seed Nuggets, 7 seed Heat, 8 seed Jazz, 9 seed Mavericks, 10 seed Rockets, 11 seed Thunder, 12 seed Pacers, 13 seed 76ers, 14 seed Grizzlies, 15 seed Nets, and 16 seed Magic. And to both me and Sam's surprise, and I think a lot of people's surprises, that ends up having it so 8 Eastern Conference teams would make it and 8 Western Conference teams would make it. So even if they ended up going with a format where it was regular, where 8 teams make it from each conference, it would still be the same teams that made the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people always talk about how, the Western Conference is so much better. I mean, maybe like the teams themselves are better, but I'm really surprised that it's an even 8-8 split between the playoff teams, because you would think that just the competition in the West, it would be like 12 Western Conference teams and the rest Eastern Conference teams. So I'm pretty shocked with this. But looking at those bubble teams, I mean, you have the Grizzlies, who they are, if the playoffs were just Western Conference and Eastern Conference like they were normally, the Grizzlies would be the 8th seed in the Western Conference. So it's pretty shocking to see a team that's led by a rookie John Morant and have a young core with Jaren Jackson Jr., Dillon Brooks, and they're actually going to be able to make it in this much tougher playoff format.
Yeah, John Morant, I mean, he ended up having a great season. He averaged about 18 points a game, about 7 assists per game. And yeah, he really led a below average roster. I mean, role guys like Jay Crowder, Jaren Jackson, he's an up and coming, just young star in this league, but just other role players like Gorgie Dang, Josh Jackson, Jonas Valanciunas, guys you wouldn't expect to be on a playoff caliber team without some superstar type players. We saw Valanciunas kind of do really good last season on the Raptors until he got dealt with a superstar with Kawhi Leonard. But I mean, to have John Morant, exciting young rookie, be in this playoff hunt, I think that would be really good for the NBA. And now I know that there's about 20 games left in the regular season. That's why these teams on the bubble are going to be advocating and fighting for just a sort of not only possibly more regular season games to be played, but a kind of tournament with these bubble teams to try to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that the NBA, what they should do is, like you said, with those bubble teams, create a tournament and just get rid of the final games of the NBA season, because if you're the Lakers, you're already in the playoffs. You're not going to want to risk LeBron, who's been off for 2 months, to risk an injury. So they should just have a tournament with these bubble teams, and then the final 4 who come out on top make the playoffs, and whoever wins the tournament is the higher seed, and so on and so forth. I think that would be a lot more beneficial, because someone like Damian Lillard, he said, if we're not making the playoffs, I'm not going to play. So they're already starting to lose some of their stars with the worst case scenario.
Yeah, in fairness to the Trailblazers and other teams on the bubble on the outside looking in, some of their schedules are stacked, so their easiest 20 games are at the last 20 games of the season, and vice versa. Some of their tougher games are going to be at the beginning of the season, and a team like the Grizzlies have had a pretty easy schedule up until this point, and they kind of got to skip a very hard stretch. So I do think it would be very fair if the NBA ended up taking maybe 13, 12 seed to maybe the 20th seed and having all those teams in a playoff type situation, maybe a 3-game elimination, and just have them kind of battle it out for that last couple spots in the playoffs.
Yeah, I would say looking at teams from like probably maybe the Grizzlies all the way down to the Wizards being the bottom tier team and having a tournament with that. Because even if it's a small tournament with the worst teams, it's still basketball and people are fiending to watch sports. So obviously everybody's gonna watch those games because it's gonna be so much more important because those teams are trying to make the playoffs too. So it's gonna be hard-nosed basketball, and a lot of people are gonna like to watch that.
Yeah, I think with doing that, trying to weave out some of the teams, I think the NBA is trying to get the most exciting players and the most exciting teams on the basketball court for the playoffs. We see a team like the Magic where they're a solid basketball team. They made the playoffs last year, and they're slated to be the 16th seed if they end up going with this format, but not a lot of superstar or even star talent on this team. I think the NBA and NBA fans much rather see a team like the Portland Trailblazers, for example, or the Pelicans make the playoffs over a team like the Magic.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, just imagine how like popular a series would be if the Pelicans made it into the playoffs somehow, and it's LeBron versus Zion Williamson. That would rake in so many views rather than LeBron playing if they did the non-conference like we're assuming they will do. If LeBron plays the Magic, no one would watch that really.
Yeah, also a very interesting storyline going into these playoffs is there has been such a long break between the last regular season game played and when the playoffs are going to be set to begin. I heard a potential late July starting date as when these tournaments are going to start. You have some key players on some of these bubble teams, such as the Wizards with John Wall, where they've been out all season, but John Wall announced he's 100% healthy, he's 100% ready to go to make a playoff push. Same with Damian Lillard. He was hurt for the majority of the season, and he's really ready to go. Another team that I would really, really look at, they're the 15th seed right now, the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference, if you wanted to look at it like that, and that is the Brooklyn Nets. If they end up getting both Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant back, it would be a very unfair 15 seed for a team like the Lakers to play. They would have to play the Nets in the first round if this format went forward, and that would be a very, very tough matchup for the Lakers.
Yeah, I just think that the NBA has a lot to figure out, and they have a lot to figure out with their stars. They need to, I mean, hypothetically talk with Nets management and be like, kind of off the grid, so not a lot of fans know about this. Be like, is Kevin Durant coming back? Because we can't have this hurt the future of like how the playoffs are set up. Because a lot is riding on this. They lost so much money that they need to make these playoffs perfect and be executed perfectly for viewership to gain back and gain more trust in the NBA.
Yeah, and hopefully we don't see some rough basketball when this tournament does end up starting, because again, these guys have been off for a couple months now. They haven't even been practicing with teammates, really. They haven't had full team practices with their coaches. I know LeBron James and some other superstars have held practices with 2 or 3 of their teammates, but that's not much in grand scheme of the NBA and how practice usually goes. So hopefully we don't go out and see some pretty rough basketball in this tournament.
Yeah, I think it will be pretty rough. I mean, I think for most teams they played 66 games, so that's not too many games left. So I think they should do kind of like let each team play 5 games just to get more in basketball shape. I don't think they should waste time making each team play the remainder of the 14 games. I mean, if I was a player on the Warriors, you're already eliminated from the playoffs. I want to go out there, play 14 games just for the fun of it, and just get shellacked each game. I would want to. There'd be some incentive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, there's no incentive for teams like the Knicks, like the Warriors, like the Cavaliers, where, I mean, they're all battling for a top seed with the lottery, not a top seed in the playoffs. I mean, I think it would be pretty silly to make some of those lower tier teams play games. So I think, again, the best case scenario would be first having some of those bubble teams battle it out for the last 4 or 5 playoff spots, really decide who the best teams are at this point with the best players, have 1 through 10, 1 through 12 seeded teams rest, be able to get more time, maybe use that time for practice, and then end up just going right into the playoffs. And I think in going into the playoffs. We've seen in the past in the NBA, it's been a 5-game series instead of a 7-game series, but I do think the NBA, due to continuity reasons, are going to end up going with a 7-game series for every single series.
Yeah, I mean, I like how the NHL, going to the NHL, looking at their playoff format, they're kind of doing for the first round before they have those bye week teams. Because the bye week teams are, I actually found this out later after we recorded that past episode, that the bye week teams are doing a round robin for seeding. Actually, so top 4, whoever wins that tournament will be the 1 seed. So it's not set in stone for each conference. So I kind of think that the NBA could do kind of like a 5-game series for the first round, and then 7-game series, and then 7-game series. I think that would be a lot more. That would be a lot more better for the league, because however long, when they start and however long this playoffs goes to, they're going to have to push back the start of next year's season as well. I know a lot of Mark Cuban kind of advocated for them to start every year after this year in December and not in October like they normally do. So who knows?
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea too, rather than shorten the next season because of this season running too late. I think that would be a good idea proposed by Mark Cuban. But getting into some of these teams, like you said off camera, I know the NBA really wants Zion Williamson to be in the playoffs for obvious reasons. I mean, he was a viewership animal at Duke. Every single Duke game was sold out when he played. Every Duke game had mass amount of viewers on the television for Duke. So, I mean, looking at this team, you had Drew Holiday have a really good year. You had Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Zion Williamson, even guys like Josh Hart and JJ Redick are big names that everybody knows in the NBA atmosphere. So having a team like that make it over a team, again, like the Magic, who are a less desirable team and not really even a desirable market either in Orlando, I think that would be really good for the NBA.
Yeah, like I said earlier, like the NBA would crave or kill for a matchup with Zion versus LeBron or Zion versus Giannis, the next best player in the league versus the 2 of the best players on the planet, potentially. That would be so great for the league's just viewership and getting money back. But I mean, also something about the Magic, they might want to kind of give an incentive to have the Magics in the playoff, because they're probably going to have Orlando be the location, or Disney be the location that they have the playoffs. So you never know if they're like, you kind of got to have the Magic in the playoffs because they're hosting our the rest of our year. So who knows with that also.
Yeah, it's a very good point you just made about the Magic. I didn't really realize that until you pulled it up. Yeah, I'm sure the Magic, if they ended up having to play a really difficult team that isn't even in the playoffs, like the Trailblazers, who have been hurt all season, but now they get thrusted into this bubble against a team like the Trailblazers, who ended up making the Western Conference Finals last year when they were healthy. So it's that kind of caliber team they would have to be facing in the first round, which isn't really too fair to the Magic, who up to this point is a playoff team.
Yeah. And I want to kind of go into, there's some similarities I see with like the Washington Wizards and kind of the Orlando Magic, that besides, like, if you look at the Wizards excluding Bradley Beal, those rosters are pretty similar. They're not really like have any stars throughout the whole roster. There's kind of just like cohesive units that would make the playoffs. So, I mean, even if you have kind of like a losers bracket tournament, I don't know if each team would want to do this, but if you can have some teams sign up for a loser bracket tournament and you can have someone like the Magic and the Wizards play each other, that would be a pretty fun series to watch, because it would just be hard-nosed basketball and a lot of teams just like grinding it out. It wouldn't be that exciting with stars, but I feel like a lot of people would watch that too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if NBA teams and NBA players would be too willing to play in a loser's bracket, considering there really wouldn't be an incentive to go hard. There wouldn't be an incentive to really win that bracket. I'm not sure. I'm sure the NBA would end up making an incentive for some of these teams, maybe a higher draft position, though that wouldn't really make sense because you would want the worst teams to get the highest draft position. But I mean, looking at the Washington Wizards, even though they did miss John Wall, I mean, they do have Bradley Beal on a contract year. He averaged 30 points per game, which is absolutely incredible. But looking at this roster in total, it's a very bad defensive roster. You have guys like Rui Hachimura, who was one of the worst defenders in the league, even though he was playing pretty big minutes for this team. Even Bertas, he's a good offensive threat. Even Isaiah Thomas, these are all good offensive players, but no really standout defensive players on this roster. So I think, again, with weaving out some of these bad teams, I think the Wizards, though they do have some star power with Bradley Beal and with John Wall, I don't think they would be a good team to end up making the playoffs this season.
Yeah, I mean, you got to like wash out those teams that are just they look good on paper when you look at all like if you look at just the conferences themselves, the Wizards are the 9th seed in the East, so they look good on paper, but if you actually look at their roster up and down, it's not that great. But like going back to the Pelicans and the Trailblazers, they're pretty good rosters all around. And I mean, they've had their injuries. The Trailblazers, Rodney Hood, Zach Collins, and Yusuf Nurkic were out for the whole year. So obviously, that's going to hurt their team a lot when that amount of depth is out throughout the whole year. So if a team like that, the Blazers and Pelicans will be able to get to sneak into the playoffs if they do kind of a low-seeded tournament to make the playoffs. They can make a deep run. We always talk about how the Rockets in the mid '90s were a 5 seed and they were able to win back-to-back NBA championships as the lowest seed. And we always talk about how the 1999 Knicks were an 8 seed and they went all the way to the NBA Finals but lost. And who knows with the Pelicans or the Blazers, they can make a deep run because Trailblazers have a pretty good roster if you look at it. They have Damian Lillard, who's clutch in the playoffs. They have C.J. McCollum. They have Hassan Whiteside. They have Carmelo, who's gotten worse, but he can be a great spot-up shooter if you need him to be.
I mean, yeah, if you have C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard averaging about 25 to 30 points per game in the playoffs, I mean, they can really challenge some of these really high-seeded teams like the Toronto Raptors at the 3 seed in this current playoff formation, like the 6-seeded Nuggets, who we did see them have an incredible series against last year, and the Trailblazers ended up pulling out of that series with multiple overtime games. I mean, even a team like the Mavericks or even a team like the Pacers, who are very young, have been injured this season, but ended up making the playoffs. I can even see a team like the Trailblazers end up knocking those teams out. But a very interesting storyline I am following as well going into this kind of bubble tournament is the Suns. I know the Suns have been very, very bad in the last couple of years. Devin Booker and company have never made the playoffs. And I think the Suns, if the season went on, they would not end up making the playoffs. But again, with this bubble tournament potential, this could be the first opportunity for Devin Booker and company to make the playoffs. I mean, Devin Booker had, again, a very good year offensively. And they did add some talent, having Kelly Oubre, who is a very good contributor, had 18 points per game, had DeAndre Ayton, who was suspended for a large portion of the season, but ended up contributing 19 and 12. You even added a really good point guard, a really good distributor who they needed in Ricky Rubio. And they ended up having some other contributions from guys like Tyler Johnson from the Heat they acquired and Aaron Baines. So that's another team I'm really going to be looking forward to watching if they end up making this bubble tournament because, again, in the Devin Booker era, they've never made the playoffs. So to see them make the playoffs and then to see what they could do in the playoffs would really interest me.
Yeah, that's a great point you made up because looking at the Suns roster, if you look at like the experience on their team, the person that's been in the league longest is Aaron Baines with 7 years. So as kind of a younger guy, your body's still growing. It can take a lot more pain. So these young guys can go right onto the court and be successful versus some older guys that it would kind of take some more time to get into basketball shape if they've been out of the league for a long time. So I can see the Suns, just them being so youthful, just going out and making a run in a play-in tournament and then making some damage if they made the real playoffs.
Yeah, and I can see this playoff bubble tournament really starting a future for some teams like the Suns we just got into and really ending the present for other teams such as the Spurs. I could see if the Spurs don't end up making this playoff formation this year, I could see them blowing up, and I could see players like DeMar DeRozan, players like LaMarcus Aldridge, who have been on this team for an extended period of time. Now, I know LaMarcus Aldridge have been on the team longer, but these veteran guys who aren't really adding that much to the team. They're making them stay afloat. They're making them a bubble playoff team, but they're really not making them be one of the best teams in the Western Conference like they have been the past decade, 2 decades. So I can also see this playoff bubble, a team like the Spurs not performing to their best capabilities. I could see at the end of the season Greg Popovich and company trying to blow up this team and really just restarting.
Yeah, I mean, there comes a time when your team's dynasty, you got to just say or when you're past the dynasty like the Spurs they've been out of it for a couple of years, but you just got to say where there's a point and you got to just blow things up and restart. I mean, Kawhi left. They traded Kawhi. He sat out a whole year, so that kind of hurt their credibility as well because he wasn't listening to any of the team doctors. So who knows with that as well. But kind of would you like to go through kind of the bubble team tournament and see who would win? You think you would win if they face each other right now?
Yeah, so again, going into some of the teams in the bubble, me and Sam kind of consider the teams to be on the bubble right now as the Memphis Grizzlies, the Nets, the Magic, the Trailblazers, the Pelicans, the Kings, the Spurs, the Suns, and the Wizards, in that order where they would be kind of seeded. So in this order, I think you would have the Grizzlies end up facing the Wizards, and that would be a very, very interesting and intriguing series to watch. I think the Grizzlies would end up playing them hard, but I can really see if John Wall comes back 100%, if he comes back in shape like we haven't seen him be the last couple of seasons, if we see kind of the old John Wall, very explosive, I could see the Wizards end up pulling out of that Memphis Grizzlies series.
What'd you say? You said the Grizzlies? You said the Grizzlies? You can see? Yeah, I can see the Grizzlies winning easily. I mean, I think it would be a sweep, or if they played in 5 games, it would be a 3-game sweep as well. I just don't think that outside of Bradley Beal, there is not much going on with that Wizards roster, and I think that the Grizzlies are just kind of the points we made with the Suns. They're very youthful, and they can just be ready to play at a moment's notice. I mean, led by Ja Morant, who's just so explosive, so athletic that he'll be ready to play, and he'll go right at Bradley Beal.
Yeah, and now another potential matchup where I think this would be a very intriguing matchup as well. Some of these matchups could be even more intriguing than actual playoff matchups that we will get into. But another matchup would be potentially another Eastern-Western cross competition in having the Brooklyn Nets play the Phoenix Suns. Who do you think would come out of that series?
I'm gonna go with the upset. If the Nets do not have Kevin Durant, if Kevin Durant does not go back or come back, I'm gonna go with the Suns just for the points I made, how they're just so youthful, and I think that the Nets are kind of a little bit of an older roster, not that much older because they still have some young guys, but I just think the Suns will be ready to play and kind of catapult them into stardom for next year. But I think that if it's a 7-game series, I think it will go to 7 games and the Suns will win.
I think it would be very dependent and all really dependent on how Kyrie Irving plays. Yeah. Are we going to see Kyrie Irving in the 2016 playoffs where he really took the scoring load off of LeBron, really said, LeBron, you can do your thing, but I'm going to be that second option. I'm going to be a great scorer, a great compliment, and I can end up averaging 25, 30 points a game with a game where I score 41 points. If we see that Kyrie Irving who wants to get his teammates involved, guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, Joe Harris, even Taurean Prince, Karis LeVert, if we see that type of Kyrie Irving play, I think the Nets would be kind of a no-brainer to win this series, because we even saw without Kyrie Irving this season, the Nets be a pretty good basketball team, play some really good teams pretty well with Spencer Dinwiddie leading. But if we see that Kyrie Irving we saw last year in the playoffs with the Celtics, that Kyrie Irving where he was averaging about 22 points per game on horrible efficiency against the Bucks and said, I'm going to keep shooting because I deserve to keep shooting, not get his teammates involved, I definitely think we can see the Phoenix Suns making their first playoff berth in a very long time.
Yeah, I think Kyrie, I mean, he's a fun player to watch, but he's a cancer to a team, like you said, just shooting poor efficiently. So if Kyrie's out on the floor taking bad shots, not making them, he's taking away from people like Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert, who were great scorers, and that would cause the Suns to be able to win.
So another potential playoff matchup that would end up happening, I think a much less exciting one, probably the least exciting that we will get into, would be the Magic playing the Spurs. Who do you think would end up winning that series?
I think I would take the Magic. I just think that they're just a well-rounded team. I know the Spurs have Greg Popovich, and they have some stars or more notable names with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge, but I just think the Magic are a more well-rounded team. I mean, they've made the playoffs the past couple of years, and they've caused some issues as the 7th seed and the 8th seed. So I think the Magic would take this one.
Yeah, I mean, when you have 7 players averaging over 10 points per game with your team, I mean, you're usually going to be a playoff team, whether that is a high-seeded playoff team or in the Magic's case, without a really star basketball player on their team, a low-seeded playoff team. So I mean, a big problem with the Spurs lately has been their depth. They've not had good guys coming off the bench. They've had kind of experimental players playing big minutes for these Spurs teams. So, I mean, again, with the Magic, we don't see one player just wow us. Aaron Gordon, I think, kind of had a disappointing season. We kind of expected him to have a huge step forward, and he kind of took a step back, averaging about 14 points per game. But I mean, again, you have Nikolai Vucevic, who's a borderline all-star playing, Evan Fournier, and even Jonathan Isaac has stepped into his role, along with Markelle Fultz, who both of them were kind of considered draft busts after their first couple of seasons, but they've even been able to pick it up for the Magic. So I definitely do think the Magic would end up winning that series as well.
Yeah, Vucevic and Fournier, they're just not names that you really like. A lot of casual NBA fans recognize, but they're really great players and can lead teams in upset victories. I mean, obviously the Magic would be higher seeded than the Spurs, but a lot of people just have this notion about the Spurs that they're so great because of Popovich and their past dynasty.
Yeah, so the last kind of bubble series we will get into, I know there's a odd amount of teams, so we're going to leave the Kings out of this one for this exercise, but the last kind of matchup that we're going to get into, another extremely intriguing one, would be the Trailblazers end up facing the Pelicans in this current format. Who do you think would take that series?
I'm going to go with the Trailblazers just because the amount of experience they have. Obviously, last year they were a Western Conference team, and you know that, they were in the Western Conference championships against the Warriors last year. But
yep.
You know that Damian Lillard, he's just a big playoff performer. He has some of the best buzzer beaters in recent memory, with the one against the Rockets. That was the first series they won in 14 years. And obviously last year he had the big one against the Thunder where he waved them off at the end of the game. And I think it would be a 5-game series, maybe 6. I think the Pelicans can sneak a couple off just because they're so young, and they do have great stars on the team with Zion, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo, Josh Hart, and Jackson Hayes as well. But I just think that just the experience of the Trailblazers and just how good in the playoffs that Lillard and McCollum are, I think that the Blazers would win this.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with the upset here, and I would project the Pelicans end up winning this series just because in the last couple of years, we've seen the Trailblazers really struggle. Not last year in the playoffs. Their problem last year was just that they didn't have enough offensive firepower to match the Warriors. They were just completely outmatched. It was pretty obvious that the Warriors were going to win that series, but in years prior, we even saw the Pelicans beat the Trailblazers in a playoff series and advance to the second round. And we've even seen years prior to that, the Portland Trailblazers really struggle when CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard can't get going because of really good defensive players that play out on the perimeter on those two guards. And I don't think we've ever seen a player quite guard those two players like we saw Drew Holiday guard them. And I think with a combination of Drew Holiday and Lonzo Ball, one of the best defending point guard, shooting guard duos in the entire NBA, that along with the Portland Trailblazers just not having that many offensive guys around them to end up scoring the ball. I know they do have Carmelo Anthony, who averaged about 15 points per game, but at a very inefficient rate. I think we would see kind of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum neutralized to the point where game in and game out, they would need some of their other players like Trevor Ariza, like Hassan Whiteside, like Rodney Hood, where I don't really have too much faith in them. I think they would need to win some games on some late key buckets, and I really trust Zion Williamson and company to get it done over some of the Trailblazers' complementary players.
Yeah, but I just think that if you look at the Pelicans roster, just the amount of playoff experience that team has versus the Trailblazers, it's just exponentially greater for the Blazers. And
yeah,
we talked about how the Pelicans were able to beat the Trailblazers a couple of years ago. I mean, they had Anthony Davis, who's one of the best players in the league, and they had Rondo who had a great performance, and he was just feeding Anthony Davis so much, and that helped them win.
Yeah.
And then the Blazers didn't even have Hassan Whiteside, who was an anchor in the middle of the lane. So I think that looking at their roster now versus back then, it's just a lot. It's a lot better than it was.
Yeah, certainly. I would agree with that. I mean, on the Pelicans, like you said, they have a lack of playoff experience. Now, they do have one veteran in J.J. Redick. I know he's a really good locker room guy. He's actually made the playoffs in each and every season of his career, which is pretty insane to think about considering he's 35 years old. But again, I just think a combination of Zion Williamson, I mean, we saw him average 24 points per game on extremely efficient shooting numbers. I mean, he shot almost 60% from the field. I mean, 59%, which is just absolutely incredible. So I think a combination of that and just, again, guys like Alonzo Ball, guys like Brandon Ingram stepping up, I think that would be a little bit too much for the Portland Trail Blazers. Plus, we haven't really seen too much Damian Lillard this season. And when we have seen him, I mean, he's had one of his best seasons ever. But, I mean, we even saw a down year from C.J. McCollum, only averaging 22 points per game, which is pretty far off from what he usually averages with about 26, 27. So I do think it would, again, be a very tough series. Both teams have some solid offensive and defensive players, but very intriguing. I would pick the Pelicans as a bit of an upset in this one.
Yeah, I think that would be a very fun series to watch. But I'm just intrigued what the future of the NBA is, what they're going to do with the playoffs. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.